There we go. Okay, thank you. Well, welcome to the second workshop of this Pollinator Gardening Workshop series. The first for, I think many of you attended it, was February 24th, and the second or the third will be on March 24th, same time, 4 o'clock. I can share the registration link again for anybody who's not registered for that. And for anybody who didn't register today through the registration link, it would be great if you could drop me your email, just direct message me in chat. And we want to send a follow-up email after this workshop with some additional resources, as well as our evaluation form. So I want to make sure that everybody is able to get that. So once again, if you could direct message me in chat, Ann Baldridge from the RCD of San Diego County. So this is a workshop brought to you by the San Diego Pollinator Alliance. We're a network of agencies and organizations working on pollinator health issues across the county. Thank you. Some of the work we've done includes creating demonstration pollinator gardens at various sites, including the San Diego County Fairgrounds and some schools and some nature preserves and places like that. And we're also working on a project to create a San Diego source of native milkweed. So hopefully by either fall or spring, some of that will start to become commercially available for people wanting to plant native milkweed in their gardens or in restoration projects. And we also do education and outreach like this workshop here today. Today we have a few speakers and presenters. We have Jonathan Snapcook from the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. Mary Duffy is going to be talking to us about native milkweed from the Earth Discovery Institute. And Michael Wall will be talking about native bees in San Diego, and he's from the San Diego Natural History Museum. Let's see. If you
All right, hopefully Anne isn't frozen on us for too long, but luckily we have a lot of presenters, so we will keep rolling along. I really appreciate all you guys coming. I just wanted to kind of orient folks to the platform. We are in Zoom in the normal mode, so we don't have question and answer. We just have the chat box. We'll be keeping an eye on that. So if you feel like it, just go ahead and chat in the chat box to everyone where you're from, if you'd like to share that. And it occurs to me that maybe I'm the one who lost the internet.
No, you're.
Oh.
No, you're there.
Everything sort of blinked off and I was like, maybe I'm the one. maybe I'm frozen.
True twilight.
All right, well, who knows? But I see people chatting in where they're from. So I assume that at least some people, no, I assume everyone can hear me and that maybe we just had Anne drop out. So let's see, we got some folks, San Diego, Irvine, Oceanside, San Marcos, Golden Hill, Encinitas, San Diego, Escondido, up in San Clemente, San Diego, but moved from Dallas, Texas. Maybe there's something you can teach us from Dallas. Well, it's nice to have folks spread out from different parts of the county and also from Orange County. Really glad to be able to provide this sort of information about creating pollinator habitat. I know that we're all interested to do what we can to get to support our pollinators. So let's see. I'm going to try just and hope that doesn't change my whole internet. All right. Okay. So today, Anne provided a little bit of overview about what we're doing. I'm going to review some of the stuff that we talked about last workshop. We have one Mars. I'm not sure if I pronounced your name right, but she offered up her garden design. And then we will pass it over to Michael Wall, and he'll talk about native bee diversity in San Diego County. And then Mary Duffy is going to do kind of a part 2 on the native milkweeds, answer some more questions that people have. I'm going to talk a little bit about selecting and buying plants, and then a little bit about putting those plants in the ground and keeping them alive. And then we'll talk a little bit about sharing your garden through some of the things. All right, so I'm going to try and share my screen. Mars, if you want to unmute and let me know how close to pronouncing your name right I came. And if you just would tell us a little bit about, go ahead.
It's Mares, and I was gonna go get
Mares.
my power cord so that there isn't one more break in the link. Be right back.
Okay, thank you.
Right back.
All right, well, this picture will give you something to look at while Mares goes and gets her power cord. But at the last workshop, basically we talked about what we want to think about when making a pollinator habitat. And that is really that we want to provide food, water, and shelter for our pollinator friends. And we want to think about what type of soil we have in our area where we're going to do our pollinator garden, if it's full sun, partial sun, a shady habitat. And then we want to try to find plants that are going to be good for us in that area. So I thought one way to do this, and also to provide inspiration for anyone who didn't fill out their garden map, it's really something that we'd like to say anyone can do with a box of colors and a little bit of thought. And so Mars, if you just tell us a little bit about the design that we're looking at that you put together, and maybe just so we can kind of gauge our own where we're at. Just if you could tell us if you're kind of a beginning gardener, intermediate, or expert. And I really appreciate you joining us today.
Okay, so it is Mares, so it rhymes with hairs, but my background is really a lot about more for a long time observing native plants in their habitat. Wherever I lived, wherever I went, wherever I lived, I just thought that the native plants were like the heroes because they belong. They belong where they are growing. I did have some formal training in a formal garden in Britain, and that got me kind of, that was wonderful, but it really sidetracked me into perennial gardens and things that you buy in the nursery, and got away from native plants. Anyway, this has been good for me because I have just connected in the past couple of years with the benefit of the native plants being pollinators. Like I am so excited. I want all of these in my garden, but I can't have them all. So what I tried to do was put in a lot of milkweed.
So where?
Oh, go ahead.
And this is in your backyard, or is it at is this in your backyard, or is this a community space?
This is in all
that you illustrated here?
This is a fantasy garden that I designed for this.
Oh, see, that's a great place to start. We can definitely all start with a
right. This is what I would
great.
like to have. I do work in a community garden, and I would say that now that I know a little bit more, their native garden, I can maybe help them out. I actually have donated 4 of the native milkweed to the garden, so I'm very excited about that. But the diversity that is in the list that you gave us is just really exciting. I tried to go by height and color and the time of year they'll be blooming, but I can see that when the poppies go in some of these places, and those are the little orange dots, those are my icons for that, then there'll be these big spaces, which is not a bad thing for a native garden, because that's how it is in nature. You don't see this big necessarily see all these great things together, doing their thing. But again, I've still got the formal garden architecture in my
How do you
head.
take a picture
So,
of a screenshot, honey?
pardon? Is someone talking?
Oh, I'm sorry.
Oh, I think one person
Oh,
is
okay.
off of mute.
So that's
No
really
worries.
enough.
It
That's
happens to
enough
all of
for
us.
me. I have a lot to learn, so that's why I'm here.
Well, you did a great job. I really like your use of the colors. So you can see that she just, for the different plants, used a different color and sometimes a different symbol, but height and kind of having some of your taller plants, like here, this orange is the giant coreopsis in kind of the back row. And then to have your smaller plants like your poppies, and looks like these are narrow leaf milkweed here with the red
Right.
squiggles
Right.
in the foreground is a way to kind of create that that visual lead into the garden. And then here it looks like maybe, is this like a little maybe rock wall or something?
Right, right. And then just to the south of that,
Black circles.
the
Mhm.
the monkey flowers are among my favorites. So I threw a lot of those in there, and so are the blue whirly, the blue not the blue-eyed grass, but what do you call them? Oh, the woolly blue curls are just so beautiful. I just love them,
Uh-huh.
and I can't wait to get a bladder.
Yeah, so a
pot.
little contrasting colors there, which appeals to the pollinators. Yeah, the bladder pods are definitely a fun one. So she's got a lot of diversity of flower colors. You know, we could look at the chart and see when those blooming times were going to be spread out, but probably with that many species, it's pretty safe that they'll be spread out. Also, what I was going to say about the rock wall is sometimes using the edging or different elevations in your garden, making a pile of rocks or soil helps to provide that visual look. And then just going to switch what I'm sharing here. Let's see. I will show one other thing in review. We're working on a toolkit, a PDF that we'll be able to provide you after the third class. We're still kind of in draft, but this is one of our gardens here at the Del Mar Fairgrounds, and you can see how we use the edging and rocks and to create a couple of different heights. And even in a small area, when you alter the heights of your garden, you can make the situation a lot more visually interesting. And also those little like nooks around the edge of a log here. This was an old palm tree that we repurposed, you know, and these are eucalyptus stumps. Those will start to rot, and those will also provide little niches and habitat for the insects to live in. So things that you can be a real benefit in a pollinator garden. All right, well, we do have a lot that we're going to pack in today, and I was lamenting this to somebody, and they said, well, I'd rather have too much than not enough in a webinar. So I hope you get your money's worth. But I will now pass it over to Michael Wall. He's the curator of entomology and also, I believe, the maybe science coordinator or science director at the Museum of
Vice President of
San
Science
Diego
and
Museum.
Conservation. Yeah. Am I ready to go?
Vice President of Science and Conservation. I was close, but not quite. So I apologize
No.
for that, Michael.
No worries.
Anyway, the museum has really been taking a large role in San Diego to bring awareness to our native flowers and to our native pollinators. And we're very, we really appreciate Michael spending some of his afternoon with us today. So I'm going to go ahead and pass that over to you, Michael, and you can go ahead and share your screen and let me know if you have any trouble with that. And then just a reminder, Looks like everyone's got themselves on mute, but that'll cut down on our line noise.
All right. Somebody give me a thumbs up. Mary, give me a thumbs up if you see a big bumblebee. All right, good. So I'm going to talk to you guys
And
very
I can
quickly.
see that, Michael. Yeah.
Okay. We can get folks to mute. I think there's some weird feedback. Thank you. All right, here we go. We are going to go on a whirlwind tour of bee diversity in San Diego County really quickly here. And we got to start off by just talking about the elephant in the room, or the honeybee in the room. And that is that when you start talking to people about pollination and bees, this is the first thing that comes to mind is honeybees. Totally makes sense. We hear a lot about them in the news. They're incredibly important as agricultural pollinators. But it is not the only bee on the face of the planet, not by a long shot. There are 16,000 different species of bees on the planet. If we just narrow down to the United States and Canada, there's about 4,000 species of bees. Let's zoom in on California. We've got about 1,600 different species of bees. And if you zoom in on San Diego County right now, currently, we have 685 different species of bees here in San Diego County. And this is due to the work of James Hung, who's a former graduate student from UCSD in the David Holloway lab. He has now got a job out at University of Oklahoma, is a wonderful human being, and has been really trying to understand what bee diversity in San Diego County looks like, along with other colleagues. They use iNaturalist a whole lot. So if you're really interested in bees in your backyard, you want to find out what they are, I highly encourage you to post those photographs to iNaturalist, because there's a thriving community of people there who are going to do their best to help you identify what you've got in your backyard. But 685, that's a huge number. We're going to be dueling with some areas of around Arizona to have the most diverse area for bees in all of North America, or at least north of the border in Mexico. But only one of those is a honeybee. Out of all those 685, only one of those is a European honeybee, which is, of course, a non-native species. And so what are all these 684 other ones that aren't honeybees? Well, they've got lots of different lifestyles, and that's what we are going to go on our whirlwind tour of, is to go through the lifestyles of the, I don't know, small and pollen covered. You can see just a variety of different faces here of our friends that are out there, our six-legged friends that are out there pollinating the world. And you can see that there are a variety of different types of faces. Some of them are super hairy. Some of them you might look at and think, oh, that seems more like a wasp than a bee to me. And there's a lot of variation in size. In San Diego County, we have both the largest species of bee in North America, which is Bombus sonoris, or Bombus pennsylvanicus, depending on who you ask. But that's what this head is here. This is a big old bumblebee head, big bumblebee head. And that little tiny bee that's up there on its antenna is Perdita minima. It is the smallest bee in North America. So you can see there's this huge variety in body size. So we've got this huge diversity of species, right? 685 species, or whatever it will end up being. We got this huge variety in body size. Why? Why is San Diego so special? And it really has to do with the flora and the habitat, right? Because we go from the oceans, the coast, to the mountains, the desert, et cetera. We have all these different sorts of habitats. We have an incredibly large array of plants that live in all these habitats. And all of these plants can support different communities of bees. And so let's talk about that for just a second, because we are really working against the clock here. But why? Why do they support so many different types of bees? And here's just a scanning electron micrograph of different types of pollen. So these are pollens from all sorts of different types of flowers that you see here. And you can see there's small ones, there's big ones, there's weird shaped ones, there's spiky ones, etc. And, plants, those pollens have different nutrient levels, and then the flowers themselves are very different. And when you think about it, like life's hard, right? You know, we need to optimize life as best as we can to be efficient. And so what we find in bees and lots of other insects groups is that there's a high degree of host specialization. So we've got bees that will only go to certain species of plants. And so this is Pepinapis, and the botanical people who are in the crowd right now are going, Peppo? Oh, I know what a Peppo is. Peppo is a squash. And so these are the squash bees. And Pepinapis only go to squash. You might find them roguely somewhere else, but they specialize on squash pollen. And if you sort of like, this is a little niche, but for me, I look at this Pepinapis and I look at the hairs on its legs here, and I look at how sort of widely spaced apart their hairs are. That's because squash pollen is pretty big. So they have to have room for their pollen to fit in between their hair. So they have morphological adaptations that help them specialize on all these different types of flowers. So if you have lots of floristic diversity, you just by default are going to have great bee diversity. And I can't get away with it because I can't not get away with it because I'm a scientist. I got to throw at least one graph up for you. But if you look at species diversity at a very high level, what we call the family level within your Linnaean taxonomy, this is the makeup of bees in San Diego County. And we'll go on a little tour of all these different groups. So I just want to show you, there's a couple of big players here. There's the leafcutter bees in orange, lots of those guys. There's the mining bees or gals, and there's a mining bees with lots of those gals. And then the apid bees, which include honeybees, but you see honeybees, this tiny little green sliver that's right here because there's only one of those. So we just want to keep emphasizing, while they might dominate the landscape, they're just one small component of the species diversity that has evolved with our native flora. Okay, that's the important part. So let's just take a little tour of the different groups. The mining bees that are we call the family Andrenidae. This is where there's this genus called Andrena. This is one that we see here that specifically specializes on the pollen of globe mallows. Okay, and which you see it foraging inside of here. It's a very large genus. It's probably one of the largest genera here in San Diego County. So lots of different species of Andrena, and these are ground nesters, thus the name mining bees. Another group, we already mentioned one of these, Perdita. Talked about the smallest bee in North America, Perdita minima. This is another species of Perdita. I can't remember what this one is in particular, but Perdita, again, has a high degree of host specialization. There's some that will only focus within just one single genus of plants, and sometimes just within 2 or 3 species within that genus. So a lot of host point specialization in that group. Again, ground nesting bees. The plasterer bees are the family, oops, got way ahead of myself. The family Andrena, that's not right. Plasterer bees are the family Calididae. I needed to change that. Doesn't matter. This is the genus Calides. This isn't a very large group. This is, I think there's about 25 or let's see in my notes. Yeah, there's about 25 different species in this family. Not very many of them, but they are, at least this genus, are ground nesters. But then there's also this genus that's called the masked bees or Hylaeus. And they are stem nesters. So they like sort of little pithy stems of grass and things like that because they're really small, little reeds and things like that. So that's that group. The Melididae, another very small group, only 16 species of this group in San Diego, including this one genus. This is where most of the diversity is in this group called Hesperapus. They tend to specialize in sandy habitats, right? They like to nest in sandy soils. So way more diverse out in the desert, but we do have some coastal species that are associated with the very endangered coastal dunes of San Diego County. Leafcutter bees, the Megachilidae, and these are, I love the Megachilids because they carry their pollen underneath their abdomen. So if you see a bee flying around with pollen on the underside of its belly, that's going to be a leafcutter bee. And there's a number of big genera, including Megachile, like this one you see here. Osmia, these are often referred to the orchard bees. These are actually used commercially as solitary bees. So they're not social like the honeybees, but they are used commercially in very interesting ways out in the Imperial Valley for pollinating alfalfa, in fact. the group might be a little bit more familiar with, the sweat bees. These include these bright metallic green, like this agapostamon here. Again, a ground nester, the most probably huge genus of these little tiny sweat bees. These are the ones that actually will come to you and lap a little bit of salt off of your skin. And these are ground nesters as well. And then the aphid bees, which include honeybees, the family Aphidae, but they also include lots of other types of bees. And this is one of my favorite bees here in San Diego County. This is Diadasia is the genus. They're often referred to as the cactus bees, but the genus, and that's because some of the members of this genus specialize only on cactus. So they go out and they collect pollen solely of cactus. But we do have other ones that are focused on morning glory and other species as well. So, but again, just trying to emphasize that there are some bees that really, they're not going to be in your yard unless you've got the plants to support them in your yard, because they specialize at that level. And before we sort of conclude here in just a second, this looks like a yellow jacket, right? This looks like a wasp of some kind, but this is in fact a bee. And there are a large group of bees spread across all these different families that I mentioned to you that are what we call social parasites. And so just like the cuckoo bird, right? The cuckoo bird goes into the nests of other birds and lays an egg and then leaves the mother of that other bird to raise its child. This is a very similar thing that bees do. So these bees don't actually forage around for pollen. And that's the reason why they're not so hairy, because they don't need to worry about collecting pollen. And so they're foraging out there in the world for nectar, but then they go into the nest of other bees to lay eggs and leave those other bees up to raise their young. And then probably one of the most beloved sort of native bees that I think, maybe not beloved, because isn't there a little nursery rhyme about kids squishing up baby bumblebees? But I think most people love bumblebees that are out there in the world. We've got a number of interesting species here in San Diego. And this is where I just want to talk to you a little bit about some research that has taken place, again, out of David Holloway's lab up at UCSD, about the impact of fragmentation on bee diversity, because this is why we're talking about developing pollinator gardens, right? We want to provide better habitat. And so they did some work specifically with 3 different species of bumblebees. They looked at whether or not they are present or absent in big reserves, little fragments like our canyons, or in people's backyards. That's what these different categories are. And what you see here in this box is that, like, they're not very present in the urban environment. And why is that? And particularly Bombus californicus is one. And what they found is that there's a really strong correlation with sage cover with the presence of Bombus californicus. Doesn't necessarily mean they're using that as a foraging thing. It could just be a correlation with other things that are going on. But clearly there are some things that are going on that are different within the urban environment, and different bees have different responses. So, sort of one of my goals as I think about this in research going forward, and I know other people are thinking about this well, is what are the best ways that we can support pollinators with the best diversity of floral opportunities. So maybe we can get Bombus californicus back into the urban area, because San Diego's urban areas aren't going to get any smaller. So what can we do to make them better, right? And so that's one thing that we're thinking about a lot at the museum these days. So finally, I should have emphasized this at the beginning. Honeybees are the things that most people are familiar with. Honeybees are social bees. They've got queens, they've got workers, they've got, these large colonies. Almost every bee that I've talked about, with the exception of bumblebees here, are solitary bees. They're single moms that are hanging out by themselves, trying to make a life. And so this is a species of Diadasia here, and she's a ground nesting bee. And that's what the majority of the bees that we have here in San Diego are, ground nesting bees. We do have some exceptions. This is the male of the valley carpenter bee, big golden bee. And you can see it cruising around. It's being territorial. It's defending the dead wood that is in this area, because carpenter bees, as their name suggests, nest in dead wood. And so they defend these territories. So having dead wood around is potential pollinator habitat. Oops, how do I go next? Let's try that. There we go. And here you go, Phil. Phil Roulard took these photographs. But we also do have stem nesting bees that are out there in the world, or would, or bees that nest in pre-existing holes. And so you see people put out these sort of bee habitats, bee houses filled with reeds or blocks that are have holes bored into them, and it's successful. So here are some leafcutter bees, one coming in with pollen over here, and this one has got carrying stuff in its mouth, and that's to set up cells to separate the different bees, the different bee cells within. It's almost like a straw, and you got one bee here and one bee here and one bee here. How do they separate it? They use all sorts of resin and various plant materials that they gather and things like that. So sort of the three different types of, at least, a bee habitat that you can think of very broadly are ground nesting, dead wood nesters, and then these stem nesters. And this is something I haven't thought about. So if you ask me this question, I won't have a good answer for you. Is, you know, what are the good plants to plant to provide habitat for stem nesting bees? And some of the botanists that are out there can think about this more lucidly than I can. But you want to think about plants that have very pithy stems, stems that have the very pithy, meaning sort of really easy to dig into stems. But for instance, carpenter bees really love to nest in the dead stalks of agaves. So, you know, if you've got agaves in your yard and they're done flowering for the season, a lot of people would chuck those, pull them out of the ground. Don't do that. Leave them there. That's potential habitat for stem nesting bees. And with that, I conclude by just saying, I just talked a whole bunch about bees, but bees are not the only game in town, as we well know. And that this is a recent study that, or summary that came out about the importance of flies in particular in agricultural pollination. But, you know, there are plenty of other groups that are out there that we need to be thinking about as we're developing pollinator gardens. We tend to pay a lot of attention to butterflies and bees, but there's other six-legged friends out there on the block as well that we need to be thinking about as well. So with that, I will turn it back over to Jonathan or Ann or whoever.
Okay.
Next.
Thanks so much, Michael. That was awesome and so interesting. It's amazing how much diversity there is with bees, and gosh, they're just so beautiful too. There is one question here from Mary. How much of the bee diversity in San Diego is lost due to the loss of bare ground?
Yeah, I don't think we have a good handle on that. You know, James Hung, who I've mentioned multiple times, is a former PhD student at UCSD, looked at fragmentation. He looked specifically at bee diversity in different canyons. And some of the other researchers in David Hallway's lab have looked at things like impervious surfaces adjacent to these areas. And they're still figuring out some of the correlations to why things, you know, there's fragmentation effects, the size of the canyon, but then you can also imagine the amount of grasses that are covering up that bare ground have to have huge impacts. And I just think it's poorly studied, to be honest with you, about like what's the best way to provide that ground habitat from a management perspective. It's easier to do in people's yards than it is necessarily in canyons and natural spaces where you're constantly going to be battling invasive species, particularly grasses.
That's one thing maybe all of us creating pollinator habitat at home should do, is leave a little bare ground for these insects.
Yeah, definitely. I think that there's some good support for that, of having some bare ground available.
Okay. And another question, what species of sage was the UC San Diego study looking at?
You know, I'm not sure. I'll double check on that and I'll put it into the chat because I actually have the paper open right here. But my suspicion is that it's black sage, but it could be black sage and white sage. I'll double check and I'll put it in the chat.
Thanks. And I had a question. Those specialist bees, like the squash bees, what do they do when the thing they specialize in isn't flowering?
Well, so I mean that's the the bane of being highly specialized, because in a way it's somewhat of an evolutionary dead end, because if you can't sync up perfectly with what it is that you specialize on, then you've got problems. And so there tends to be a lot of, this is one of the things that people are concerned about with climate change, is the asynchrony, the difference in timing of when flowers bloom versus when the bees come out. And if those get mismatched, it's going to start becoming problematic. And so, but there are sorts of environmental cues in the desert. Rain is an important environmental cue. But yeah, if there's no game in town, I mean, they will, try sometimes to forage on other things, but really the first thing they're going to try to do is just forage around forever trying to find something that's non-existent, and then maybe desperately pick something else out. But there's going to be a huge decrease in efficiency in that, and probably decreased reproductive output. But that's worth looking into. I'm sure there's some literature on that.
Okay, thanks. And then another question, can you speak a little to narrow-leaf milkweed pollinators like Pepsis wasps and others?
Yeah, milkweeds are their own little beast. They've got a very specialized pollination system. You need John Redmond, our curator of botany, to talk to you all about that. He loves this story. He calls it sweepstakes pollination, because the way that milkweeds package their pollen is not loosely so that it's dusting, but it's in little backpacks. And it's kind of an all or one scenario. Some sort of critter picks up your pollen backpack and it takes it all away. And it's a roll of the dice to make sure that it actually transfers it to another flower. But totally 100,000% Pepsis wasp, the tarantula hawks, seem to just be they must have just the right size of leg to be able to pick up those little pollen backpacks, because they can be fully loaded. But I also, and I'm sure you've seen this as well, Mary, carpenter bees tend to pick up those little pollinator backpack or pollen backpacks as well. So yeah, definitely it's its own little beastie.
Very cool. Thank you. And I see one other question here. It says, where do bees fit in that pollinator list?
Oh, the last one that I showed was the top 10 insect families that visit major crops, excluding bees. And my guess is, and I need to go and I can look at that again, and I might try to type something into the chat here. But my guess is that, like, if the top one, hoverflies, was here, well, it was a percentage, and that was like 50%. That, if you include bees, you're going to get up to close to 100%, right? Because they are sort of that's what they're all about, right? Is pollen. So.
Cool. Thank you so much. That was really fascinating.
One last question for you, Michael. What are monarch butterflies considered pollinators of anything specifically?
I don't know, to be honest with you. And so I would have to do a little bit of work on that. There's nothing that comes immediately to mind. I think on that last graph that I showed you, brush-footed butterflies and then other butterflies did pop up on that list. But it's typically the classic sort of butterfly / moth pollination that you see out there in the literature often has to do with things that have very long corolla tubes, right? So we're talking about the big tube of the flower that because remember, butterflies have this unspooling proboscis. And so you got to think about, like, that proboscis goes down to get nectar at the bottom of a flower. And where is the pollen associated with that? And if it's just touching their proboscis, is that going to be very efficient? Because it's not like the proboscis is covered with hair like a bee. So the specialized systems tend to be where the moth or the butterfly literally has to stick its face down into the flower so that the pollen picks up on the face. But it's so varied. There's 1 million different described species of insects out there, and every one of them's got a different story.
Do you happen to know how many species of bees have gone extinct so far? That was another question that just popped up.
Oh, no, that's a good question. I can see what I can find out.
Great, thanks. Okay, unless there are any other questions, I think we'll hand it back to Jonathan. And thanks
Thank you,
again.
guys.
Thank you, Michael.
Well, thanks so much, Michael, for joining us. And thank you for sharing all those beautiful slides. I see some people clapping. So yeah, keep an eye on the San Diego Museum, Natural History Museum website. They periodically do talks and blogs and have other special things related to insects. They've also got nice photos up there on their website, and hopefully we will all be able to visit them in person soon. So also just wanted to thank Anne for hosting with us today. She's going to have to take off a little bit early today. It's her son's birthday, so happy birthday to your son, Anne. And hopefully, without your good guidance, we're able to trundle through the rest of our webinars. So everybody keep your fingers crossed on that. I'm going to pass it over to Mary Duffy now. She's a biologist at the Earth Discovery Institute. It's one of San Diego's great conservation organizations. They do a lot of public outreach events and really do a lot to educate the public. But Mary and Sarah and some of the other folks on their team, as well as the Endangered Habitats League, on one of their properties called Lakeside Downs, has been growing native milkweed collected right here in San Diego and trying to get that species into the nursery trade so that when we buy milkweed seeds, we're getting milkweed that are have evolved in San Diego County and are used to our soils and climate. So she's here to share some of her expertise with us. Last week, she did sort of the overview on their seed project and talked a little bit more about cold stratification of milkweed seeds. So we're going to kind of follow up where she left off. And so Mary, I'll give you 15 minutes so you can take us till 5 o'clock, and I will pass it over to you.
Let's see, am I muted? Hi, everyone.
hear you, yeah.
I'm Mary Duffy with the Earth Discovery Institute. And I spoke to you all last week about planting milkweed and the different things we've discovered in a very short period of time. We just started this effort with the Earth Discovery Institute about 2 years ago. We started collecting native milkweed seed in the wild. And then we started planting it and using a number of techniques to figure out which planting technique was going to work the best for growing narrowleaf milkweed. And so we grew some in a greenhouse, some direct to ground. We used cold stratification, which I talked about last week, and just various techniques to see how easy it was to germinate milkweed from seed. And fortunately, from the seed we gathered locally, we had incredible success, up to 70%, 80% sometimes of our seeds germinated. And they particularly liked cold stratification, which is where you put them in the refrigerator for a couple of weeks to a couple of months in a little wet vermiculite, just a little moisture in there with that to put them in the refrigerator. You can also, Sue Krause has told me at Moosa Creek Nursery, where she grows our local milkweed also, that just putting the seeds in the refrigerator for a couple of weeks or up to, you can leave it in there for a couple of months, mimics that natural cold stratification that plants get in the wild. I also think, and this is just anecdotally, that the reason people in the past have had so much trouble with growing milkweed is because unlike a lot of our native seeds around here that are well adapted to living in the ground for a long period of time, mostly because of fires and drought, they're adapted to that sort of thing. You can take a seed that's several years old and get it to germinate. But if you've ever looked at a milkweed seed, it's really, really tiny, light and fine. And so I don't think the embryo has a lot of resources in that seed to last for very long. So I have a feeling a lot of people, when they're buying seed from big seed companies, are getting old seed. And I don't think the germination rate in those old seeds is very good. But with fresh seed, we've had incredible success growing narrowleaf milkweed. And this year we're also starting to grow woolly pod milkweed, Asclepias aerocarpa. So we keep encouraging people to grow native milkweed. I think it's really important that people let their tropical milkweed go. And if you don't want to let it go, then you do have to cut it down. November, December, January, February, March. Keep it cut back for those months. It will grow back as long as you just, cut it down right to the base and let it grow. You can start letting it grow back in March just to protect the monarch larvae from the OE parasite, the protozoa that builds up on those milkweeds that stay alive all year round. I know a lot of people aren't as excited about growing the native milkweeds because they do go dormant and die back in the winter, but they're actually really beautiful plants and they're worthy of any garden. And a lot of the plants that pollinators need, including forbs and annuals, die back in the winter. And you can plant your garden so that it's, accommodates that and you still have a really nice looking garden, even including plants that do die back. So they're worth having, I think. Anybody who has any questions, please, you can just unmute yourself and ask me out loud. I'm really here to answer questions today. So if you have any questions about growing native milkweed or even, buying it at a nursery and transplanting it into the ground, I'm here to answer them.
And we're really hoping to get people trained up so that they can do, they can grow, you can grow your own narrowleaf milkweed and that you can get that going. And we are trying to, get examples out there in the community of people who've let their tropical milkweed go or take it out and switched over to native milkweed. So go ahead, Deborah.
Yes, so I'm doing a lot of native plant restoration in Rose Canyon in University City. And my question is how many, so we just put in a few milkweed plants this year but how many do you put like in an area, like how big an area of how many plants? Because I know, otherwise you get, 6 caterpillars on one poor little plant or poor 6 caterpillars on one plant. So how, if you're doing out in the canyon restoration, how many milkweed plants would you, or how big an area of just milkweed would you recommend?
I think the first thing to do is identify the area that you think has the most, retains the most water throughout the year, the most moisture, because unlike all the plants we encourage people to grow, native plants, we're always telling you, oh, they're drought tolerant, this, that, and this. The narrowleaf milkweed needs water. It needs moisture. So it likes to be right in that creek bed or in a low swale that holds water at the end of a stock pond, someplace where it actually does have or holds moisture all year round. It might be dry on the surface for part of the summer, but there's moisture right under the ground. And so that's the first thing to do is to identify that. And then as to how many milkweeds you can plant, it loves to grow in thickets, in big groups. So you can grow, we grow our milkweed pretty tightly, but you could grow it easily if you're planting it out of gallon pots or if you're getting it out of little rose pots. You can grow it easily 6 inches apart or so. You could grow it closer if you wanted to. When we plug seeds in, we just plug the seeds in just a couple inches apart. It also, if it establishes itself and it likes where you planted it, it'll die back. It'll put all of its resources into its root system and then it spreads through rhizomes. Even though it has a nice taproot, it does spread through rhizomes. So the next year, you should get a lot more milkweeds coming up around that milkweed that you planted. But I encourage people to plant as much as they can afford to plant, Yeah. And then that way, like you said, you've got enough milkweed, you hope to feed those larvae when they consume the plant. But in the wild populations of milkweed, I find, and I think Jonathan will concur with me on that, it's usually that the happiest milkweed is a milkweed that's growing the most close together in a tight area and a lot of milkweed.
Okay.
Yeah, great question, Deborah. So we've got a handful of questions in the chat, and then we have a couple of hands up. So I'll keep track of the people as you raise your hand, but go ahead and you can use the reactions button either at the bottom or the top of your screen to put your hand up. I'll go ahead and take a couple from the chat, Pat, just so we don't get behind there, and then I'll let you ask yours if that's okay.
Yes, thank you. I would like to know about the frass from the caterpillars or the larvae. Does that contaminate the soil below?
That's a great question, and one that I couldn't. Are you asking contaminated with what? I mean, the frass is basically poop. So
Yeah, but I understand. I mean, is it true that the frass is actually sort of poisonous? I mean, you want to get it off. You don't want it on the leaves, and you don't want the caterpillars crawling over the poop, over the frass. So let's say you've got a nice crop of caterpillars, and so they've left all this frass at the base of the milkweed. Do you need to maybe put some fresh soil down there or spray it with hydrogen peroxide solution or what?
well, I mean, in nature, none of that's going to happen. But I have to be honest with you. I don't know the answer to your question. I don't. I can't imagine that monarch frass would be that toxic in a.
Yeah, we'll have to ask some other folks about that.
Yeah.
I hadn't heard of that either, but thanks for bringing it up, Pat, and we'll make a note. Okay, so from L. Barnett, we have what is best temperature to germinate milkweed?
Milkweed, you know, if you're doing the cold stratification, you're putting it in your refrigerator, which is about 40 degrees. And what I found is that it does not germinate. It does not start growing until it's about 80 degrees, and it really likes 85. So the first year I grew a bunch of milkweed, I had all these flats, and I kept thinking it's never going to come up. It's never going to come up. It just sat there, and then all of a sudden it heated up in March and hit 85 for a couple of days, and boom, that milkweed came up everywhere. So some people in greenhouses I know do artificially heat their milkweed if they want to force it into germinating early. They put it on a heating pad or something like that. But here in San Diego, you don't have to wait long for it to get up to be 85. It just have to keep it wet.
The next question I answered in the chat, what months do you cut back narrowleaf milkweed? And I said, if you do decide to keep tropical milkweed, go ahead and cut it back in late October, early November. But again, we're really trying to get people to move away from that because it could provide the monarchs with cues to keep them from migrating if that's what they would like to do. I'll do one more question from the chat and then we'll go to Sue. Do you recommend direct seeding or growing in pots and then transplanting? I think you kind of touched on this already, but if you just wanted to.
Direct seeding has been the most, it's all we're going to use now to plant in our milkweed farm. It's been the most successful way to for us to get milkweed up. And I think too, I found that milkweed is a little, it doesn't like having that taproot disturbed. So if you're buying it in pots and stuff like that, you have to treat it not as carefully as like Matalia poppy or something, but you do have to be a little more careful about disturbing the roots when you transplant it. It doesn't really like a lot of root disrupt, especially that taproot. So you'll notice it has a bunch of little fine hair roots all over. So, those are the ones that are going to send out the rhizomes and help it spread. And then it usually has one bigger root, which is the taproot, which is what it's going to use to get down there and get that water so that it's got plenty of water all year round.
Okay, so Save the Bees asked, could you put it in a perennial veggie bed? And I did have narrowleaf milkweed growing in the corner spot of my raised vegetable garden bed, and it seemed to do great there. And then for you, Mary, there was a question about what happens, how do you get seeds on a narrowleaf milkweed that you have at your garden? Do you need more than one? And so go ahead and answer that one.
Collecting your seeds off your own milkweed plants once they're produced So the plant will go to flower early in the summer, and then as the summer goes on, it'll start producing these big green seed pods. And the best way to collect seeds is a technique that I know Jonathan uses too, is to just take these little gauze gift bags. I wish I had it of my slides together and I could show you, but they're like little gauze baby shower or
Yeah, if you search
bag.
on Amazon for wedding gift bags, they're little
Yeah.
gauze bags that have a drawstring.
You
get
can
about
you put them
100
right
of them for
over
$10.
over those seed pods and then pull the little strings tight, and there you are. So that what you don't have to manage going out there every day and making sure that you've haven't missed when your seed pod explodes and breaks open, and then all the pappus flies the seed off and it's
Yeah.
gone. You've collected.
And in this case, the person was wondering, do they need to have more than one? I do think that it needs to cross-pollinate. So yeah, you'd probably want to have more, a cluster of milkweed or a couple of plants in your garden. I haven't whereas on the tropical milkweed that I used to grow, I would always get seeds on that. Whereas with the narrow leaf, I've only found the seeds out in the wild. So, all right, Sue, if you'd like to unmute and ask your question.
Hey, we have a monarch way station that has in a park that has some hills. And I was wondering if building a swale would be a good answer to keeping them moist. And what would be a good resource for learning how to engineer that?
It's a really good question. I couldn't tell you. We, in our milkweed farm, we actually irrigate it. We actually have irrigation, and that's how we keep our plants moist. They're on an irrigation system with a timer that just puts enough moisture in there to keep it moist, not too wet.
Yeah, so one thing that we've done in a lot of our gardens is kind of created them as rain gardens. So we've looked at where we can concentrate the rain coming off of roofs or off of slopes and whatnot. So in a lot of our past in-person workshops, we've trained people how to do a technique called hugel culture, which is a method where you bury wood and compost and mulch, and it kind of creates a moisture reservoir. Alden who's taught the workshops with us before from Sky Mountain Permaculture. I'm going to try and get him to join us with Annika Neighbors, who's from the UC Extension, for our March 24th workshop. But also I know that the California Native Plant Society is working on talking with Alden to organize a hugel culture workshop through the CNPS online series. So keep a look out for those. And if you send me your email directly, I can put you in contact with Alden Huff over at Sky Mountain Permaculture.
I wanted to answer somebody's question I just noticed back there. When it comes to the native narrowleaf milkweed, you don't have to cut that back in the winter. It'll go.
Yeah, good distinction.
Big dry sticks. Yes, you can cut those sticks down, but again, like what Michael said, possibly they're kind of they're not really, really big, but they're kind of pithy. Bees might make homes in them. I leave them up. A good reason to leave them up is so that next year you know where your milkweed should be coming up.
Yeah. Just one other thing. I think we need to move on to our other topics for that evening. A lot of good questions. Mary, maybe you can take one more look over the chat while I mention this thing that I was going to say. So last year I had my narrowleaf milkweed in a 5-gallon pot on my patio. And from that, I had maybe 5 or 6 stalks poking out of the ground. What I did this winter at the end of January, beginning of February, was I took those out of the pot. I bought 6 new just black plastic 5-gallon pots. And with each of those stalks, I sort of carefully broke apart the root ball, and I put each stalk with its roots in a new 5-gallon pot with potting soil. And those are all coming up nicely now. So I was able to turn one 5-gallon into 6 5-gallons. So that's another thing you can do. And of course, if you're able to get them established in your yard in a spot, they will spread by their rhizomes. And so you can spread them around once they get going. So that's something to keep in mind. Okay, well, Mary, did you see anything else that you wanted to answer, or any last thoughts there on milkweed 102?
Yeah. One last question. And if anybody else asks a question, I missed it, please just raise your hand. Somebody said, are you taking volunteers to collect native milkweed? Yes, we do. If you follow the Earth Discovery Institute's website or Facebook page, we usually put out notifications when we do a couple of collection dates on private property, so that we can show people how to collect milkweed if they've got it, especially if they've got it growing on their own private property too.
Right. Well, thank you so much, Mary. Really appreciate you sharing your expertise with us, and what you're doing with that milkweed farm out there in Lakeside is really cool. So thank you so much.
My screen, if I remember how, real quick.
Okay.
You. No, I'm not. I was going to show you how our milkweed farm looked right now, but I'll figure it out another time.
Yeah. Well, it looks beautiful. So just imagine.
Yeah.
All right. We are going to shift gears to talking about choosing our plants, buying our plants, and then planting and caring for the plants. What I'm going to do is I'm going to share a couple of different websites that I recommend, and I will put the link to each website in the chat, and then you can copy it out of the chat and look at it after the website, or after the webinar. All right. Let's see here. Okay. So this is the first website we're going to look at. This is at the California Native Plant Society, CNPS. They're one of our partners in the San Diego Pollinator Alliance. I'm going to put the link into the chat here. The chat is apparently decided to leave my screen. All right.
I'll put it in.
Okay, thanks, Mary. Yeah. Okay, so this is the website, Where to Buy Native Plants in Southern California. You know, we're lucky in Southern California to have a lot of local nurseries. People like growing things. If you're well organized, you can go to one of the annual plant sales. The California Native Plant Society always has a fall plant sale at the second week of October. And sometimes they've been having a fall and a spring sale. I think with COVID, they were doing an online order sort of situation. But what you want to do is just kind of keep familiar with the Native Plant Society, maybe sign up to get their newsletter, and they always have good information. Then they have a good list of nurseries that are local. And a lot of these you'll find have a small selection of native plants, but a lot of times if you talk to the nursery person about what plants you're interested in, they can help you get them. Also, if they supply from Moosa Creek, you can place a special order with Moosa Creek. And Mary, maybe you could put Moosa Creek's website into the chat. you can do a special order, and they have a number of nurseries that they will deliver it to. Also, Native West is a nursery which is generally a wholesale nursery to the restoration industry, but they also want to help us do pollinator gardens. So I talked to the owner there, and he said that you could email him with the plants that you're looking for, and he could help you connect with those plants. I'm also going to put a little bit more detailed plant list into the chat, and you can download this Excel file. Last week we kind of started off with the intro list, and just in case people don't have that handout from last week, I'm going to go ahead and put that into the chat as well. But the Excel sheet that I'm putting in there has the same type of information that we worked with in our handout from last week, but it was, what am I trying to say? The Excel sheet has more details and more plants. So if you weren't overloaded with information before, we're hoping that we can overload you with information. And then one last website that I'd like you to put in there, Mary, on this topic is Calscape. So that is really where you can go and get a ton of information about plants. You can put in your zip code. I'm going to go ahead and switch over to that website here. This one you can put in your zip code, or you can put in a search specific for pollinator type plants, and it will provide you a lot of detailed information. Oh, that doesn't really seem like it wants to work out. Who knows? All right, there it is. So on Calscape, it's a great website, was developed by a professional web developer. And then my understanding is that he donated the website to the California Native Plant Society, so it could be a resource to the public. What you can do in this box right on the front page is you can type in your zip code, and it will bring up a specific list of plants that's good for your area. So put in Carlsbad. See, there's a question, how big do milkweed plants get at full size? Like I said, they can spread by their rhizomes, but they're going to get about 2 to 3 feet tall, unless they're really happy. In the wild, I've seen ones that are taller than I am, 8 feet tall in a riparian area. So if anyone gets an 8 foot tall milkweed in their yard, I definitely want to know about it. So here on Calscape, this will give you native plants to your zip code, and then it has them categorized like in different, shrubs, perennials, bank stabilizers, butterfly hosts, and then you can click on those and it will bring up the specific list. And like California fuchsia is a nice plant. It kind of gives you its distribution, shows you some pictures, and then it will tell a little bit more about the plant, how big it gets, what type of wildlife it supports, a little bit of information about taking care of the plant. So you can really go in here and get a lot of information. All right, so that covers where to buy, a little bit more information on selecting plants. And then I wanted to talk about planting the plants and then caring for the plants. And then in the next workshop on the 24th, we'll get into creating a maintenance plan for your garden. We will hear from Annika Neighbors about some of the specifics about thinking about that relationship between plants and insects as how that pollinator relationship works. So you can learn a little bit more about attracting pollinators to your garden. And I'm hoping to get Alden to talk a little bit more about making a sustainable garden, reusing materials, creating hugelkultur, stuff like that. So let's just pause for a minute and see if anybody wants to type a question in the chat or raise their hand and ask a question. Okay, Mars. You can go ahead and unmute and ask your question.
Okay, I'm curious to know if anyone or if there's been any success with reaching out to local landscaping nurseries for education to them or telling them what they should buy and what they should stock. Any communication going on like that?
You know, I think the California Native Plant Society works a lot on that. You know, we've had within our San Diego Pollinator Alliance, a lot of times the idea to go out and start working with kind of the mid-sized nurseries, because I think that's really where we could do a lot of good. But in terms of, you know, just bandwidth and getting funding for somebody to hit the ground and then really know what we're asking of those mid-sized nurseries, you know, and not necessarily wanting to overreach our bounds into what and how they do their business. I think what we've sort of zeroed in on is educating the public, and then hopefully the public goes to the nurseries that they like to go to and asks for the things that they would like to plant, and just kind of hope that it happens naturally. But certainly we've thought about potentially making, you know, kind of our best idea is that like garden centers would have kind of a kiosk that said plant for pollinators, and it might have some of the like the same information that we're conveying through this workshop, but maybe a brochure. But you know, then we kind of get started talking about, you know, is this really going to help me sell plants? And then we're a little out of our league. So I would suggest, you know, if that was the type of thing that you wanted to help with, certainly let me know, and I can connect you with some of the other people who are passionate about that. And maybe we can find one or two garden centers that want to embark on a kind of a pollinator corner. The other thing I'll say is that both those local larger scale wholesale nurseries, Moosa Creek and Native West, have both been very receptive to our pollinator program. They're both helping us grow the native milkweed. Sue at Moosa Creek has developed a pollinator pack, which has maybe 10 to 20 different species. That's a little over $100, but that's a way to just directly buy from her some you know, kind of a variety of pollinator species, and she's very passionate about that. So I'm sure calling their nursery would get a little bit more information on that program. And then Ryan at Native West is also.
Yes, I did have
very
really
supportive.
good luck with Native West. They were excellent. They answered their phone. They told me what they had. They told me their prices. They set them aside, and I just went in there and picked them up. It was really cool.
Great. Yeah. So I think we're kind of in the first wave. So if we can train you guys of how to do it and what questions to ask, and you can share a little bit of information with your neighbors, that we will be in good shape. All right. We're getting close to our 5:30 time. I want to just share a couple of websites about planting native plants. Moosa Creek, you know, we try not to promote any one nursery over another, but some of these native plant nurseries do have put in a lot of time into creating these resources for people, and they're available, you know, free on the website. So I'm going to go ahead and share them. Here at Moosa Creek, they've got a nice how to plant section. I also really like the planting guide section at the Tree of Life Nursery. It's pretty straightforward. It's a one-page document. I know G-John's on the call. G-John, if you could pull up that website for Tree of Life that talks about planting plants and maybe paste the link into the chat, that would be super. I don't have that on my sheet of links right now, but I do know that I use that a lot when I'm out planting with school groups. Basically what you want to do when you're planting your native plants is dig a hole that's twice as wide and twice as deep. That's a good rule of thumb. And then what you want to do after you dig that hole is you want to fill it with water, and you want to let the water soak into the ground. That kind of gets the ground softened up so the new plant can start to expand its roots out of the pot. I also recommend the first day when you plant your plants, make sure you are generous with your water. You want to water them till they've kind of a gallon or two for a gallon plant, probably 3 or 4 gallons for a larger plant. And then you want to come back again later in the day and give them another good drink. Probably for that first week after you plant them, you want to water every other day. I also recommend planting either this time of year or in the fall, October, November, December. I discourage people planting later than May, but that's not to say you can't do it. It's just you got to watch your plants a little bit closer. And if you've just spent $200 on plants, you don't want them all to go belly up. So you kind of want to follow the guidelines to increase your success. So but this is a great time of year to plant them. Then a lot of people have questions about watering native plants. What I recommend is that you go ahead and water them through the first year, unless they seem like really just happy and fine. But then after the first year, I recommend not watering them during the summer and fall.
Except for
And then go ahead,
narrowleaf
Mary.
except for narrowleaf milkweed. You get to
The
water
narrowleaf
that.
milkweed, it likes riparian areas. We do find it on some preserves in dry areas, but usually those plants look pretty skinny. So, you kind of want to pretend like it's kind of in a wetter soil area. So yes, thanks for reminding that, Mary. So any questions on the topic of planting your native plants and caring for the native plants once they're in the soil? Thanks for putting those links in, G-John. Let's see, what's the best soil to use? Well, it depends on what type of site you're on. If you're on a site where you're digging more into the native soil, a lot of times what I like to do is mix like half native soil with half like potting soil or garden soil, just so that there's not like a hard transition from, that nice soil that your pot comes from the nursery in and kind of a harder clayey soil. So I'll usually mix like a 50-50. I don't recommend using fertilizers. Generally our native plants are used to a pretty low nutrient soil. I have to remember to ask the question and then answer it. Let's see.
Speaking of that, I just say too that on our milkweed farm, we do use mulch. We use native mulch. We used actually chipped coast live oak bark that's been aged on the ground for 2 years. So we don't use leaf mulch, but we use the coast live oak mulch. And we don't put the mulch on until the plants have come up. If you put the mulch on, if you're planting from seed, you'll actually suppress the germination of the plants. So you have to wait till they germinate and then put the mulch on to hold the moisture in the soil after that. And they tolerate that very well.
Yeah, always a little bit of mulch can definitely help you retain that moisture and to just extend the time between waterings. But once these native plants get established, they are pretty good. The other thing in terms of care and maintenance, and we'll go into maintenance a little bit more in the next workshop, is I always encourage people not to be afraid to prune their native plants. Once they get happy, they can really go wild. Each year when we go back to our pollinator garden at the San Diego County Fair, our California Encelia, which is like a sunflower, is trying to take over the entire area. So, some of them you have to cut back harder than others. And then some of them, they just reach the end of their life cycle and they kind of go kaput and, don't feel like you did anything wrong. Just either replace it with the same type of plant or perhaps that plant wasn't right for that part of your garden and try a different one. I think I'm sharing just a couple other things I wanted to talk about, and maybe we'll go into this more in depth, but just ways to then share the hard work that you put into your pollinator garden. Of course, you can do it on your own social media, but this is a great place to register your garden, the Million Pollinator Garden Challenge, just kind of a way that you can let other people know that you're doing something to help with the pollinator conservation. And then if you are specifically gardening with monarchs in mind, it's nice to register your site as a monarch way station. I don't know if there's a fee associated with that, probably because they give you a metal sign. There's some other groups that have, backyard habitat type programs. And if you have one that you really like a lot, you can go ahead and put it in the chat there, or one that your garden is hoping to be registered in or that you've already registered in. But, it's kind of fun to put a little bit of signage in your garden. Also in the past at the fair, we've made pretty nice signs for our plants. And if anyone would like help making signs for their gardens, you can certainly drop me an email and I can provide you with some of the information about how to get signs made for your plants. Jijan added into the chat, as for soil supplements, you can do Jijan Hazard. We call him Jijan, but it's John Hazard. He works at the Fish and Wildlife Service with me and really does a lot for native plants and pollinators locally. Let's see. He replied, as for soil supplements, you can do some research about the soil type you have and what native plants are appropriate to that soil. And he again recommends the Cowscape website to look up information about soils and drainage needs. We're just about at 5:30. If anybody has any questions, you can raise your hand and I will call on you, or you can type them in the chat. All right. Well, I really appreciate you guys attending. We had probably around 40 people that attended this evening. Really thank my co-host Ann Baldridge at the Greater San Diego Resource Conservation District. They have a great website for pollinator stuff, and we're hoping to build it out a little bit more.
Hey, Jonathan, real quick, this is Michael.
Sure.
We are going to do a shameless plug here for a free program that the San Diego Natural History Museum is doing every Thursday, or at least for the first 4 Thursdays of the month of April. We'll be having daytime little mini symposium of what we call the State of Biodiversity. It used to be a day-long symposium, but here in COVID world, we're doing it remotely. So if you go under the museum and go to the events page, oh, Jonathan, you were fantastic. Go to the events tab there. It's the third from the, there we go, State of Biodiversity. Bingo. Oh, you're already on it. There you are. So there's a different theme every Thursday, and you might find something there that is of interest to you. It all has to do with biodiversity and conservation here in Southern California. So feel free to check it out. It is free. You just have to register. Thanks.
Yeah, thanks so much for telling us about that. Mary or Anne, did either of you want to say any farewells or tell people about things that you have coming up?
Thanks everyone for showing up. It was great having you all. Thank you, Michael, for presenting on the insects. And I put my email in the chat if you have any questions, and I'll happily answer whatever I can or try to refer you to someone who can. But thanks for your interest in growing native milkweeds and providing pollinator habitat.
Let's see, I don't know if Anne is still with us, but
Just stopped back in real quick.
all right, we survived, Anne.
Barely.
Yeah. Yeah, but thanks everyone so much for coming and being here. I'm pretty interested in supporting pollinators.
And then if anyone doesn't feel like they registered, if they just got the link from a friend or something and you'd like to get the post workshop notes, we'll probably send out an email and an evaluation tomorrow or Thursday. You can just change in your chat, instead of from everyone, just change it to Jonathan, and you can send me your email and I will grab that and we'll get a set of notes out about the workshop. But we
I got
really
a few
appreciate.
people send me their emails too that hadn't registered through.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, great. So Anne got probably most of those, but if anyone joined in late and wanted to make sure you're on the email list. We'll kind of stay on for 1 or 2 minutes here, just so that we can properly shut down the recording and whatnot. But you are free to leave. We really thank you guys for coming and supporting pollinators through whatever efforts that is. So thank you so much.
Thanks for everything. It's great. See ya.
Thank you very much.
You're
Thank
welcome.
you guys so much.
Sure, good to see you, David.
Good to see you guys too. I'll see you soon.
Yeah, take care.
Use that playing for him so he can just.
All right. Let me
Thank you for the nice talks.
Sure, Susan. Thank you for joining us. All right. If anyone has any last questions, happy to answer those.